Hello, students. So, today we are going to take up the non fictional work in your course, prescribed in your course, which is Decolonizing the Mind, the Politics of Language in African Literature. This is by Gugi wa Thiong'o. So, let's discuss this work today. So, before we go and discuss the key ideas that has been presented in this book, we are going to know something about the work, okay, about this non-fictional work. So this work, Decolonizing the Mind, is a very famous collection of essays, and like I told you, it is written by Ngugi wa Thiong'o, who is a Kenyan writer and thinker. And this work was published in the year 1986, and it mainly focused on how language and literature were used by the colonial powers to take control over the African minds and culture. Okay, so throughout this work, he talks about the impact of colonialism on African languages, then literature, culture. Okay, and he also explains how the colonizers not only took away African lands but also controlled African minds by forcing them to learn and use the foreign languages, especially your English language, right? So instead of their own native language, they emphasized on learning the English language, which is a foreign language to them, and that is how they tried to control them. Right. So Gugi also explains how colonization was not just about taking away land and resources, but also about shaping how people think, okay, how they speak and how they are going to express themselves. So according to Gugi, true freedom is something which can only come when African people return to their own languages and to their cultural roots. Okay, so this is all about this work. Now we are going to discuss some insights. I'm going to give you some insights of this particular work. So there are several things that has been discussed in this work. First is your language as the tool of control. Now, this is one of the most important ideas that has been presented by Gugi wa Thiong'o in this work, that language was used by colonizers as a tool to control and to dominate the Africans. Okay, he explains that when European cultures like countries like Britain colonized African nations, they made English as the main language in schools, government, and education. So African children were taught in English and speaking their native languages like Gikuyu, Swahili, and Zulu. I'm going to spell out the names to you so that it will be easy for you to write in your examination. Gikuyu, Gikuyu. Okay, then Swahili, Swahili, Swahili. या फिर Zulu, Zulu, Zulu. So these native languages were discouraged or they were even punished if they speak these languages, these children. Okay, so this created a belief amongst the Africans that African languages were inferior or maybe they were unimportant. Okay, and as a result of all these things, many Africans started to feel ashamed of their mother tongues and they began to admire the foreign cultures more in comparison to their own culture. Okay, so according to Gugi, this was a way to colonize not just the African land but also the minds of the African people. Okay, by making them think, dream, and by making them express themselves in a foreign language, which is English, right? Then the next thing is language and identity. Now, Google again believes that language is deeply connected to identity, culture, and way of life. So he says that language is not only a way to communicate, but also a way to express how people see the world, how they live, and how they relate to one another. Okay, so through language, people pass on stories, traditions, songs, knowledge, wisdom. Okay. Um, so they share all these things from one generation to another, right? It is through language only which makes it possible for them to transfer these elements of their culture, right? So when people lost their language, they also lost a part of themselves. Okay, so they become disconnected from their heritage and culture. And this is what Boogie argues in this book, that this loss of language is one of the biggest damages that was caused by colonialism. Okay, and he says that reclaiming African languages is more important when we are taking a step towards reclaiming the African identity and pride. Okay, then African literature and African languages. Now, this is another thing that he criticizes, that he says that he criticizes this thing that many African authors write their novels, poems, and plays in English or French. Remember, you read Things Fall Apart. उसमें भी तो चिनुआ अचेबे ने इंग्लिश में लिखा है. He is not using any African language to write that novel. Then we have Edward Britfight, जो मोस्टली एडवर्ड ब्रिटवाइट, नहीं, डेविड डियॉप आई थिंक, जो फ्रेंच में लिखना पसंद करते थे. आई एम फॉरगेटिंग द नेम ऑफ द पोइट. वेल, देयर वर मेनी पीपल who did not like to write their novels, poems, and plays in the African languages. Okay, they wanted to. They always wrote in the language of the colonizers, in the languages of the colonizers. So Guge here believes that this continues the legacy of colonialism and keeps the African literature away from the common African people who are speaking and understanding the local languages. Okay, so he says that when African writers use their own languages, their stories become more meaningful and relatable to the African readers. Okay, and he says that literature should spark to the people directly in their own tongue, right? So why he is saying so? Because this is going to help them create a truly African identity, right? Because then it is going to reflect this kind of African literature is going to reflect the real life struggles, their dreams, right? The dreams of the African societies. So Gugi himself began writing in his mother tongue, which is Gikuyu. Okay, even though it was a very difficult and less recognized language internationally, even then he started writing in his mother tongue. Okay, and why did he do so? Because it was a political and a cultural choice, right? It was a way through which he was resisting the colonial influence. Okay. Then comes personal experience and political action. So he also shares his personal experiences in his book. He says that he tells us about. The way he was educated in English and how he initially used to write in English as English only. Okay, but over time he became aware of how language played a vital role in colonization. Okay, he realized this thing that he was actually contributing to the colonial system by not using his own language. So he made a very conscious decision, which is to stop writing in English and start writing in his mother tongue, which was Gikuyu. Okay, even though it has a very limited audience, even then he started writing in his mother tongue, which was Gikuyu. Okay, so he talks about how his political plays, which are written in Gikuyu and also performed in villages for local audiences, and they were seen as dangerous by the government. So, and if I could recall it correct, he was even arrested and imprisoned for his work. Okay, so he stayed committed to this belief that writing in African languages is more or less a form of resistance, and it is more like a way to empower his people. Okay, then the last point, decolonization beyond politics. He in this work makes this thing very clear that decolonization is not only about political independence, like gaining freedom from colonial rule. He says this thing that even after African countries became independent, they continued using those colonial languages in schools, courts, and government offices. Okay, and in this way, colonialism continued to exist in a different form. Okay, so he calls for mental and cultural decolonization, which means that he uh, says that we should be able to free the minds of African people from the colonial thinking. Okay, so for Googie, true decolonization means taking back control over how people think, over how people speak, and how they are going to express themselves. Okay, so it means valuing those African languages, cultures, traditions, and also passing them on to the future generations with lot of pride. Okay, so, all in all, we can say that it is not just a simple book. It is not just a simple book. In fact, it is a very beautiful message that he is trying to propagate. Right? He challenges his readers to rethink what the role of language is in shaping their identity, in shaping their culture, in shaping the power dynamics of their nation, right? So he argues that language is the key to cultural freedom, okay, and that African people must not only rely only on the languages of their former colonizers. Instead of that, he says that they should celebrate and use their native languages in schools, books, everyday life, in media, everywhere, right? So, and this is the reason why this book is very relevant even today, right? And it is not relevant only for Africa. In fact, it is relevant for all the nations that have been colonized. Wherever people are trying to rediscover and reclaim their culture. Okay, so the message of the author is to truly decolonize. We must first decolonize the mind. Okay, so that's all in this work. Thank you.